Coming up on the Roar Rugby Podcast, one of the biggest guests in Roar Rugby history, Emmanuel Meafou, the French international, Aussie raised, Kiwi born, joins us. And in addition to him, Sam Cordingley, the man who is behind the Queensland Reds success, the list manager, the general manager, Sam Cordingley, and Australian rugby flying 4 Super Rugby sides in the top 6 of the Super Rugby standings, if you can believe it, after 6 rounds. A lot coming up on this edition of the Roar Rugby Podcast. I'm Christy Doran with Matt Tamua. Hey, let's start where it just most recently ended, and that's on Sunday, the Western Force. Way too good for the Fiji Drua. I don't know how much you saw of the game, but I'll tell you what, if you missed the first 10, 15 minutes, blimey, you would have missed a fair bit, because 3 tries in 13 minutes, a couple to Nick Dolly, the hooker. He was laughing, and the Force were laughing too.
They sure were. It was obvious what was happening from then on, wasn't it? It was just a matter of time. I know the Drua scored a couple nice tries in around half time, but geez, the Force really stepped it up a gear. And who would have thought the Fijians would struggle in the heat? I thought they were, it was good.
It was always going to be a high-scoring affair, I thought, but I didn't anticipate the Drua not to really show up, and they really didn't in the opening kind of stages of the game. But nice to see the type 5 of the Force dominant. They really took it to the Fijians. But Ben Donaldson, when it's loose, he looks pretty good at 10. And, geez, that back line, like Harry Potter's couple of tries that he scored, 1 in each half, were about as good as individual tries as you will see. But a lovely one to break open the Fijian defence in the first half. And then the second one, a lovely inside ball from Donaldson that he runs straight on, and then the kick ahead. It was a bit of magic from Harry Potter.
It sure was, yeah. And I heard the commentators, they were not very creative with it as well. But no, look, you'd usually attribute that to the Drua. If he was wearing number 11 of a Drua shoe, you'd be like, oh, yeah, normal week. But he brought his running shoes. He did. He was very, very sharp.
It is refreshing to see the Force, and they are now in 6th position. So they're going to head to Queensland next week with their tails up. Much needed win off the back of 3 defeats on the bounce, but a really good result for the Force, and you tip their hat. It was interesting to hear a couple of the backs, Mac Riley as well, talk about the influence that Leon McDonald's having on that side. And I'd love to have Leon on the show. I don't know if we'll get him, given that the All Blacks and his departure there is so fresh and raw for him. But clearly, he's been a really great addition for this Force side, and you can just see things starting to come together under Simon Cron's leadership. The big game was the night before, though, an Aussie derby, one that you used to play a lot in. And interestingly, I had a photo come up on my Facebook, and it was like a memory from 10 years ago, and I'm pretty sure you played in it, and it was pretty controversial for a couple of reasons, but it was Jacques Boyd-Keita having some unacceptable language that he used. But it was a cracking game, and I think, once again, the Brumbies were too good on that day. They weren't so good on Saturday night, though, with the Waratahs blowing away the Brumbies in the first half. But blimey, there was a bit of controversy with the officiating from Ben O'Keefe.
Yeah, there really was. It was a belter of a game, though, wasn't it? It was just what Aussie rugby needed in a way. Had that really hard physical edge. That Dan McKellar, like I think we mentioned it a few times, that 2-man tackle that they're employing is just, it's brutal. You just see them accelerating into the contact. But yeah, in a weird way, it was a bit not overshadowed, but it's very much a fine print or a small asterisk there next to the score. He just lost control of the game, I thought. It was only yesterday I was down at the shops and some bloke come and said g'day to me, and he was just, blowing up about the ref, and I think he had every right to, but that's very much the feeling down here, was that, he kind of lost his grip on it. And unfortunately, the Brumbies, I think they're probably guilty of feeling like the victim a bit in that first half, and took a little while to snap out of it and find margins in these big games, and that was probably enough.
Well, that was certainly Steve Larkin's sentiment shortly after halftime when they crossed to him, and he said, we've got to get on with it a little bit. And Alan Alato was talking about needing to show a bit more leadership there about getting everyone back with their heads straight and focused. But ill-discipline cost them really ultimately. A card in both halves, and we might touch upon some of the controversial moments in a moment, but Corey Toole probably pretty fortunate first up there not to be penalised off the kickoff. Like, it looks like it was high. It was surprising that wasn't penalised from the outset. It was also surprising late on that Ollie Sapsford, probably a high shot there on Andrew Kellaway's that's missed. And then I think a minute or two later after that, Angus Bell probably tucks his arm and it doesn't look like there's any form of wrapping there and a shoulder charge. So it's lucky that it didn't make any contact with the head. Yeah,
and that was indicative of Ben O'Keefe just losing touch and feel of the game. Like, he was reviewing, I think it was Maher's, I don't know if it was Maher, but anyway, he was reviewing the tackle below, seeing if there was arms. It's like, mate, look up a bit.
Joy in heaven.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's like, look up a bit. Belly's got his arm tucked, and he's belted him. And I think it was just one of those nights where every time they went to the TMO, it went the Tars way, and they were. Like, other than that one, the other two, like, yeah, they're their cards. Like, by definition, they're cards. But you're probably right to feel hard done by when, Jorgensen touches the line. Or another one I was just seeing, actually, I was watching the highlights just again, was when Jorgensen chips over, kicks it again, and they score in the corner. Like, just before that, Lonergan's been knocked out cold. Like, why wasn't he stopping the game? Like, it just... It's one of those ones where you're like, if you're going to get nitpicky. But if you're going to be, it was just frustrating.
Well, I was staggered that Corey Toole, who was pushed by Tristan Riley, that wasn't called. Ben O'Keefe was right there and he said shoulder to shoulder, but hang on a moment, Tristan Riley was half a metre behind Corey Toole there. So I don't know how he deemed that. I also don't know how he deemed that it was deliberate from Ryan Lonergan to pass into Mahe Veolanu. Like, he was straight in the passing zone every day of the week. It's a penalty. And the Brumbies still might have collected the ball pretty easily, but I think Ollie Sapsford kicked the ball thinking that it would have been under penalty advantage, because generally speaking, that's a penalty every day of the week. And these sorts of things added up in the first half. And when you think about the fact that there was twice there with the decision not to say that Jorgo was in touch, it was they kicked and they turned over, they scored a try there, but the Corey Toole incident and the Ryan Lonergan incident were massive territory gains for the Waratahs, which changed the momentum of the game. And I think that killed the Brumbies early on. And we saw some of the frustration come out with Tom Hooper with his ridiculous, MMA kind of style ruck clearance there where he puts Daniel Botha on his back.
Yeah, and I don't really want, like I said, I don't want to, it's definitely not overshadowed. I thought the Waratahs deserved to win. The Brumbies they played victims. They let frustration get to them. Their discipline was not good enough. It's just, it kind of soured a little bit. On a positive side, it was great to see Rob Leota in the wide channel a couple of times. It was awesome to see Isaac Kailea come on, get 2 steals and got the ultimate one at the end there as well. Like, there were some awesome performances, and like I said, it's probably it wouldn't be doing it justice in the sense that it's overshadowed. It was very much a talking point. It's frustrating that it is, but it was a ripper of a match.
Oh, I loved the contest between Langy Gleeson and Rob Valentini. I thought that was unbelievable, and picking a team of the week was extremely difficult because you're trying to pick guys in their preferred position. In the end, I had to have Langy Gleeson at 6 and Harry Wilson at 8 because both of them were just superb. But right the way through, there were amazing matchups there. Lenny Yukatau, he didn't get into the team of the week, but he was superb for the Brumbies at outside centre, and he's just going from strength to strength. So, disappointing evening for Noah Lolesio. I think he probably would be the one that comes away going, I needed to step up a little bit more there. A couple of simple drop balls, and indeed the one that was eventually overturned. What's your, before we leave this and move on completely from the officiating, what's your perspective on the change of law to allow for it go back? The try there was scored 8 phases after the knock-on that was deemed a knock-on. It was pretty 50-50, I think, but it was deemed a knock-on from Lolosio. Do you like the new law variation, which allows it to go back to the start of the attacking phase, or would you like it to be the old school way where it's just 2 phases that you go back, and then if there is a knock-on before that, well, tough luck.
Yeah, we'll change the wording for a start, because it's not the start of the phase. Like we say, it's phase 1, 2, 3, 4. Like it's a new phase. So by definition, like at least change the wording so it's the start of the series or whatever, because phase just makes it complicating. I think you have to, just because the way things are replayed, the way things are on social media afterwards, you kind of have to. It's a bit like VAR in the football. Like you kind of have to go that way.
What would happen, though, if it was not just 8 phases, but 25 phases? It's 3-4 minutes.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then do you set the clock back? Like I agree that there's what's the statute of limitations. It's maybe 7 years? So let's go 7 phases. But I don't know. It's frustrating. I don't like. It's one of those things where if you're looking at that and then you look in context, like it's not really an issue because it was a knock on. It's not really an issue if he's not going back on on Jorgensen's one and all this. It's like at least apply the same kind of theory, i.e. if there's been an error or an indiscretion in the past that we're going to review, then bring it forward. Just a bit of common sense. I think when you start bringing the rule book out in a game of rugby, it gets difficult. And like I said, I just felt he lost control of the feel of the game. He kind of wasn't. Yeah, he didn't have his finger on the pulse.
Well, I'll tell you what, either way, it was a spectacular game. It was physical, and I loved the ending of it. Like the Jack Debrasini crossfield kick to end in your head was just like, it was textbook, perfect. And I thought, they're going to come back and get this. But 1 or 2 line outs, the clearance wasn't textbook either there from the Brumbies. So a couple of small things really hurt them there. But look, I don't think it's the end for the Brumbies. I know that Larkin was despondent about the fact that they've now let a few games slip, and it's so important to finish in the top 2 to give yourself a home semi-final. But sides are beating teams all over the place, and you only have to look in the last couple of weeks to know the Chiefs went to the draw and to Fiji and lost there, and the Crusaders way too good for the Blues at the moment, but they've already dropped one themselves. So I wouldn't be putting a line through semi-finals for any of those top 6 at the moment, particularly the top 5. But the Waratahs, they're unbeaten at home, and they've got bigger tests ahead. The Hurricanes is going to be a really big one this week. I loved watching the Blues and the Crusaders as well. The Crusaders playing unbelievable footy. James O'Connor is just coming off, and he is that calm head at the end, isn't he? And what he's doing, it was great to have him on the pod last week, but he seems like he's really embracing that finishing role tag, which I don't think he would have been happy with 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe the ego would have been saying, I'm not sure about this. But at the moment, he seems like he's actually embracing it.
Yeah, definitely. And we're, spoken about at length, the 23-man game that it is now, and teams, international teams, usually using it as a tactical kind of measure. And you've seen Stephen Larkham as well sub the 9 and the 10 at the same time, really making sure there's a bit of cohesion there in the game callers. And I agree with you. He's a competitive guy, so he probably would have seen that. But a bit of time, probably a fair bit of appreciation for the club that he's at the moment, and just very much being a part of it would change your perspective on it for sure.
Crusaders 42-19 winners. We're not going to talk at length about the Reds win over the Highlanders 29-23 because we're going to have Sam Cordingley in just a second, but it was a good win. It's a drought-breaking win, 12 years between drinks there under the roof at Fulsvar Stadium. But what stood out to you about it? Because it's pretty hard to go over there without 6 or 7 of your Wallabies. No Fraser McWright, Tate McDermott, Ryan Smith rested. No Matt Fezler, no Josh Nasser, no Josh Fluke. And you go over there and you win. It was a great result.
Yeah, it really was. And, Kalani Thomas was great, I thought. To that try he scored, he's fending off a bloke. really starting to see some of the time and investment in these players, and they're starting to show when they're getting game time. And they've got a good thing going on at the moment. The probably the most surprising thing was Liner missing 3 kicks under a roof when he couldn't miss anywhere else. But it's one of those games where he didn't need it, so who cares? He'll kick him when he needs it. It was. I think it was like breaking a few of these hoodoos for Test players, for Aussie rugby players, is massive. The Brumbies in Eden Park recently, they're big. Like they build belief, and it can't be understated how important they will be for the psyche of Australian rugby.
Yeah, it's a really good point you make. I've got to say, I think the best player in Australian rugby in the opening 6 weeks of the competition might be Filippo Dianguna. He has been unbelievable this season. Once again, outstanding at outside centre. It'll be fascinating to see what Joe Schmidt's thinking about. Is he the alternate sub at the moment, given that he can play on the wing, or do you start him on the wing? Either way, he missed a lot of the Test season last year due to injury. I think we'll see him back in the mix for the Lions, should he so fit. But great to see him playing. Sarah Uru was ever present, wasn't he, right the way throughout the first half particularly. Harry Wilson was strong. But the scrum, the maul, the foundation of the Reds is built behind that at the moment with Zane Hilton, what he's doing there with the Reds. But Alex Hodgman had an afternoon out when he came off the bench for Seth Bargassi. You've got to be so pleased if you're the Reds, because they're going to host the Force this week and they're humming at the moment. They've only gone down to the Crusaders, so they're very well positioned at the moment. We're going to talk to Sam Cordingley on the other side of this. Hey, we always talk about the players and the coaches. Very rarely do we get an insight into who actually organises programs, brings the players together, and indeed helps select the coaches. One person joining us right now, Sam Cordingley. Sam, great to have you on the pod. You must be a very happy man, because it might not have been so rosy 5, 6, 7 years ago, but I tell you what, the Reds are flying high at the moment.
Yeah, g'day guys. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, look, it's been a good start to the season. Obviously, still a lot of rugby to go. But as you said, we've come a fair way. Since back in those those days you mentioned 6 odd years ago, and a lot of work to get to this point.
Sam, speaking general managers, I can't help but think of Moneyball. Do you have any is there any stats that you look at other than, get on base or whatever, but is there any stats particularly around age? I know Christy wrote an article recently about that, that average age starting to get about 25. Is there anything that you look at on your sheet that you clear kind of markers that other people might not think about?
I don't know if there's a magic formula, Matty. I mean, we're big believers in cohesion here. The more games you're playing together, the better off you're likely to go on field, and that cohesion exists around, I think our staff as well, which I feel has been a real positive for the Reds. Got a lot of long-term staff who have been in the program. As I said, we've got a bit of an abundance mentality around talent as well. I think 80% of our squad have come through our pathways, or our elite pathways, our academy. A lot of great talent here in Queensland, and guys like Dale Robinson and Paul Carrozza do a terrific job of sort of connecting our academy to our senior program. But we do track our Reds caps pretty closely, and obviously we like that to align with guys playing for the Wallabies as well. We have I can't give too many secrets away, but we have got a pretty fantastic data scientist who's along with one of our great partners, QUT, Professor Dimitri Perrin, who's come in to lend a hand in that data space. But I'll keep that information unique to us.
And how much of that is how much is Les on top of that stuff, or is that kind of is it very much you don't touch that, I don't touch selection? Like, where's the role kind of separation, and how's it intertwined? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I've been pretty lucky. Coaches I work with, Thorny, into Kissy, I mean, they're collaborative. They have their focus is on coaching and what goes on the grass. And I suppose mine, from an administrative point of view, that's not an interest of theirs. So we do cross over. I mean, I'm not going to be making any decisions around list management or staff appointments without including them and getting their opinion on things. It is important that we have alignment. There's been a case that I can consider that we'd elevate above the both of us to be a rugby committee or CEO to sort of intervene. We've got a pretty regular process around our sort of list management and, as I said, staff and review processes that allow us to make some pretty well-informed decisions.
There's got to be a reasonable vision about where you go as a rugby club, because the Reds, and Matt kind of touched upon it there, back in 2020, the Reds' average age for their squad was, I think, 21 and a half. And now it's 25. And you've seen that guys have come through together. Obviously, the Junior Wallabies was particularly strong in 2019, and guys like Fraser McWright and Harry Wilson come through together. But, take them in a year or so before that. It's taken 5-6 years to get to this kind of point in time. And it looks like, if you talk about a premiership window, it looks like it's starting to open up now, and that's highlighted by the fact that the Reds are right there towards the top end of the Super Rugby standings for the first time in a while.
Yeah, I think, as I said, we've got a big focus on strategy, sticking to strategy. That's revolved around identifying, developing our best local players, and as you mentioned, a number of those guys have come through those pathways, 20s, etc. And you're probably back to that 2018-19 period where, I think it might have been that year of the transition of a lot of the Force players that sort of landed in Melbourne. And we'd made a decision at the time to sort of back our youth to come through. That was sort of coincided with a pretty difficult period around finances, and obviously we moved into that COVID period at the time, and we had to be quite strategic. And credit to our board at the time, sort of backed in, the fact that we did have a good group and that it was going to take a period of time, for these players to come through. They're now starting to get pretty expensive, these lads. So, I think we've got, just on the count, by the end of this season, we're likely to have about 15 players that are 50-plus caps within the squad, 19 internationals, to work into $5.5 million. So that's, I think that's one of the things, I think, around the list management side of things. It's quite easy to identify. I think most of us can identify who the talent is, but being able to fit them into that cap is where the challenge comes. Particularly when guys are, playing regular internationals, or, as I said, you've got a number of players that have high level Super Rugby, which is, clubs from overseas are, tracking pretty closely as well.
Sam, a criticism of Queensland Rugby for so long was, players would always get lost, always have the best juniors, and then they would kind of get lost. And how do you try and attract a young guy who's maybe getting NRL interest, more money, down south or out west? How do you incentivize that? Is it very much a case of like trickle down, that if the Reds are doing well, people want to aspire to that? I noticed, like, on the weekend, you guys sent a lot of guys over to Dunedin who got game time, and that very much, if I'm a young fella, I'm looking at that and see, they actually play their roster, how are you kind of pitching it to these guys that there is a clear pathway?
Yeah, it is. It's a good point, Matty. I reckon if we sort of look back to a decade ago, for the Reds, we'd sort of abandoned that investment into our academy and lost that connection between our best young talent. For whatever reason it was at the time to make that decision. I think it sort of went towards a national academy for a period, and we had to reconnect that. And probably during that period, we'd sort of We'd lost a few key players, but the reality is that Queensland and New South Wales really have been the net providers of talent. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I'll go back to that point that, we have a bit more of an abundance mentality. But ultimately, we're not going to be able to keep them all within the system. Our job is to identify who are the very best of them, provide, within succession planning and development plans, how we can actually bring those players through. And we've got some outstanding kids that we've retained recently, Kingsley Ace and Will Ross, those type of players. We've got some outstanding players like Nick Conway in our system. And there is a clear plan for those players. And, I'd say we probably didn't, 10 years ago, we weren't doing it as well. But, one of the great things about, as I said, Thorny and Kissy more recently is a philosophy of what we term close the gap. So presenting those opportunities for players, that are outside of the squad or perhaps at the back end of the squad and connecting them as closely as they can be to our program to demonstrate that care and opportunity. And, we probably have a bigger focus on the development of that elite talent and pumping our energies into the best kids, as opposed to trying to resource multiple junior pathway programs in terms of teams. We don't have a big, whilst it's great to win pathway games, but 15s, 16s, 18s, 19s, the more important part of it is to really pump the effort into the best of the players that are coming through. I think that's something that we've done quite well recently. You might have seen that we have A games at the beginning of the season where the best of our players, or those players that are outside of our squad in terms of contracted players, we supplement our programs with our best youth playing against first grade clubs, which is obviously playing against men, and that's a better opportunity for those players to develop, we believe. At the same time connecting them to the Reds program in terms of our style of game.
I know it's a complex kind of thing, and it probably, you could speak about this for much more than a single response, but someone like a CEO Kaite, who's just made the decision to go to La Rochelle. He was part of the 15-16s Queensland Reds junior system, part of the Australian under-16 system. When someone like he decides to leave, and he kind of, I know that his father, and it was quite outspoken around the decision to leave because it wasn't guaranteed that he would have a contract later on in life. How does that all kind of sit with the Reds a couple of weeks, a month after, the dust has settled now? Like, he's very much in France. How does the Reds and maybe even RA kind of reflect on a pretty promising young kid opting to head offshore?
Yeah, I think in that particular case, I'd say there was probably a preference. I mean, he was a young lad that was certainly involved in 15's ERC, 16's program. I think that he was going to be part of our under 18s program. He'd already represented Australia under 16s. So the opportunity for him to develop was there. And in terms of assuring him, a professional contract in future, that would be, something relatively unique for such a young player in rugby. I know in rugby league they have the capacity to put pretty heavy contracts in front of young players, and for a young prop, that would be a little bit more of a challenge. I mean, we would look at that and say, well, okay, it would have been great to get the opportunity to talk to him in the event that we knew that French club was interested. And usually in the case where a player has interest but has a preference to stay, that player will come to the table. My understanding was that he had family over there, and we wish him all the very best. Our opportunity now is to keep monitoring him, and in the event that he's interested in coming back to Australian rugby, to stay connected, and the door's never closed for those players that leave. We just like to make sure that there's a conversation ahead of their departure. And I would add to that we've actually, I mentioned Kingsley. We've got a number of other players, who play the same position that are older and have represented Australia 18s and those sort of programs that are part of our program going forward. So there's always someone that's willing to step up. I mean, as I said before, that what we need to do is ensure that the best of our players are staying around.
It's a never-ending cycle in terms of your job, constantly, managing talent, thinking about the next generation and succession plans. How does that go in terms of like coaches? Is that something that is it made between yourself and the CEO? Is there obviously the elephant in the room being with Les, if he was fortunate enough to step up to Wallaby coach? Is that your role, and how does that work? How do you kind of, how are you all on the boat, but then you've also got to keep an eye on, what might happen?
Yeah, as alluded to, Matty's staff as well, like keeping an eye on who the best of our staff that are coming through. I think, one of the great things that I think I might have mentioned earlier, that we've had key staff that have come through the program here, internships, PhD students that are now, and certainly in my view, industry leading in their roles. Someone like Thomas Barker, who's our team manager, been here for over 10 years, outstanding young administrator. Matt Ireton, who's head of athletic performance as well. Jake Nichols, who's taken over, our analysis. So, we're constantly looking at who's coming through. In terms of coaches, it's the same thing. I mean, we would like to, I reflect back on the NRC days where, those opportunities for development. I reckon you would have played, Matty, a few games of NRC back in the day, but, what an outstanding competition that was for coach development, match official development, wider staff, and not just the players. And, if you reflect on some of the names that came through there, Filippo Dagunu, Geordie Pataya, like other players, Tom Banks from other clubs, Fraser McWright, Harry Wilson. So, but in terms of process, mate, to probably answer your question, we are quite process driven when it comes to, appointments. We think that's important to make sure that we are, testing the market. Certainly not my decision. I mean, Queensland coaching decision will ultimately come down to the board, but there'll be a process that's obviously put in place, to make a recommendation to board for such a significant role. But we've got some fantastic coaches within system. I mentioned Dale earlier. Zane Hilton, who's a locally developed coach, who's cut his teeth for a number of years overseas. We've got some great club coaches in our system as well. So, monitoring those coaches that are, certainly with that Queensland flavour that might be applying their trade overseas as well. So, we feel we're pretty well placed there. Although I'd like to think that, in future that the game in Australia has another tier of development that can allow all of those roles to develop more regularly.
Hey, Sam, if I had a hat, I'd be tipping my hat to you, because you did extremely well there not to mention Les's name once.
I knew it was coming, Travis. I know it's coming.
Has it been, like, you're not the person who's selecting Les Kiss for the Wallabies, and I'm sure that there is a short list. Who's exactly on, it's not entirely clear. But is it a bit of a stressful period for the Reds, not knowing exactly how this is going to play out? And it's been an ongoing discussion now, not just for a couple of weeks, but a few months now, and we're almost midway through the Super Rugby season too. So I imagine that you're always trying to be a step ahead of the game, but at the moment you can't really do that.
Yeah, if I was to say it, for myself personally, to say it hasn't been a distraction, I'd be bullshitting a bit. But look, I think I'll preface this by saying that I think Kissy would be a wonderful Wallabies coach. Be that, if he was to take over immediately or any time into the future. He's certainly got the credentials, he's got the wisdom, and certainly I'd imagine the backing of the players, the Queensland players, I'd say. And, I think he'd be great at the role. From our perspective, we're supportive of his aspirations. If in fact he does become the primary candidate for the role, our position is that we're just keen to get an aligned plan with Rugby Australia, because it's obviously important that for Australian rugby to be successful, Queensland need to be successful, and Kissy and his coaching team are contracted through to 2026. So we'd need to, I think it's in everyone's interest that there's a coherent plan around what that next stage would be in the event that Kissy is that primary candidate.
One thing that's always been seen as like a prerequisite to become a Wallabies coach is winning, Super Rugby, or winning a competition. And you just spoke about earlier about being, quite process focused, and that if you're like, in terms of how do you think, I'm not sure how to frame my question here, but if you're Rugby Australia and you're looking at this, and obviously Les has generated a lot of interest, what makes him uniquely qualified in that sense? Because in terms of runs on the board, if you're looking at it from afar, there's not necessarily a title there, but clearly he has something that other people don't see. Is it what do you think is kind of separates him from that kind of preconceived prerequisite in the past?
Yeah, I think you'd be talking about a relatively tight crew of recent Australian coaches that have won Super Rugby titles. But I think, from Les's perspective, as I said, he's coached at international level, albeit in supporting roles. I think, a coach that, is coached in environments like, Ireland and England, multiple seasons, had to manage multiple personalities, throughout that time. I think that's a strong point for him. I'd also suggest that his man management, from what I've experienced within our program, is first class. Wins on the board, having not won a Super Rugby title, I would say that the Reds' progression, in recent times has been a real positive for Kissy. But it's kind of like, Matty, it's kind of like, I suppose in an ideal world, you'd be trying to select a coach that's won 3 successive titles. I don't think we're there, in terms of Australian coaches. I personally like to see an Australian coach, within the Wallabies, and I think that's been spoken about by Phil and probably even Joe as well. But I do think he's well credentialed in terms of his ability to shift a culture and take us to where we are at the moment, acknowledging that we've got a long way to go before we can start patting ourselves on the back. As I said, it'd be a pretty narrow list if we were to be basing it on titles alone, I think, from an Australian coaching point of view.
Look, I know we've chewed your ear off. Appreciate you coming on. Before you go, guys like Kalani Thomas, Angus Blythe, there's been a lot of patience shown with some people that haven't always had long stretches of time out with the playing minutes. Are they some of the players that you're most thrilled about seeing? We saw their development come to the fore on the weekend with the win over the Highlanders. Those two guys starting in particular. Is that the most satisfying part of the job, that you've backed these guys and now they've both got 50-plus caps? They've really had to wait for their time, and they've actually grabbed their opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the more satisfying parts of the role. I think, seeing players progress through the system that, have probably, in Kalani's case, sat behind Tate. But you kind of forget that he's been instrumental in a lot of our, on-field results as well. And for a player like him to be so young, to get to that 50 cap mark is, credit to himself as well, and the program, the staff that supported him in that space. We've got a lot of good players now at the back end of the list, and I sort of revert back to the pressure that's now on me to retain those guys, at a level within that cap that's manageable. And
even harder when you don't have a head coach that's locked and loaded.
Well, I mean, and as I said, I suppose the credit to the wider staff and the environment that's been created by, everyone in here is that the guys, recent signings will attest to that a lot of the guys are keen to stay, and they've got, I think, faith now that the organisation and that's not just the professional rugby department. We've got a fantastic organisation across the board that is really keen on supporting and creating one of the better rugby environments in world rugby. So I think our players are seeing that. They're seeing the care that's demonstrated and the investment that we're putting in the program around things like nutrition, as I mentioned before, data science. Some of the investment that we're putting into travel to get some of our recent wins that we have on the road. It doesn't come without planning and investment, and it's been backed by our executive team here and our board, which we're really thankful for.
Yeah, it's a credit to you as well, Sam. I know as a Queenslander, it's so good actually seeing Queensland get the ducks in a row a bit and structurally making changes that are hopefully there for the long term. So thanks a lot for coming on. And it genuinely is. Like I said,
I got the easy job, mate. I just I try to employ good people and hold on to them, and makes my job really easy.
Well, mate, you didn't get to employ Matt Tamua. You tried to recruit him, but missed out, I heard.
Yeah, we had his cousin for a while, so he was
the better one too.
No, we got there, and Melbourne got to him first. So one of the misses from Sam Cordingley and the Reds, unfortunately.
It was Thorny turning up to our interview in a singlet, and I was like, oh, maybe they don't have their stuff together. No,
I'll make sure the next time, mate, wear suit and tie.
It'll be Queensland way. No, I love it.
Hey, great chat. Really appreciate you coming on the Roar Podcast, Sam. Cheers.
Good on you, fellas. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sam. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Hey, awesome to have Sam Cordingley on the pod, and I don't think you can understate how important he has been with Queensland rugby in recent years, and it's kind of it's coming to the fore right now. The investment, and we heard about that. It was interesting to hear about the data and so forth that's going into it, but you did a good job there, Matt, asking and probing around the succession planning. I very much like that. That was good from you.
Yeah, well, if you've got them, use them. And I don't think I was being a pest. But no, but his answers were great too, which is the best thing. And to be honest with you, like I have been quite critical of the process. Well, not even critical, just saying what I might think. And so it's kind of cool to just ask the guy and really, see what he's thinking and kind of speak about it. And he's very grown up and. Like I said at the end to him, he's done a wonderful job there, and as a Queenslander, it's good seeing Queensland strong because it's important for Australian rugby.
Well, we're 20,000 at the last home game for the Reds. It was 20,000 on the weekend for the Waratahs as well. So you can just start to see, the success on the field is making a difference with people coming through the turnstile. A quick shout out to the Waratahs as well. Speaking of the 20,000, great job having a bit more creativity. You got the fans, you got the school kids, you got the club kids coming through, and they're on the field, they're making lines, they're getting around. But we're also seeing the entrance of the players come through a bit of a tunnel, and that creates a bit of theatre. We see it in France all the time. There's hundreds, thousands, generally speaking, that welcome the top French 14 sides when they come on off the bus and into the stadiums. And I think we could tap into that a little bit more just to get the buzz, because you don't see it in the other AFL and the NRL so much. It could be a point of difference. And speaking of a point of difference, it is a man who provides that more often than not off the bench in Test match footy, Emmanuel Meafou. Hey, it's a very warm welcome to perhaps the biggest guest that we've ever had on the Roar Rugby Podcast. And yes, by reputation, but also physically too. Emmanuel Meafou, great to have you on the Roar Rugby Podcast. How are you this Monday morning, your time, as we speak to you?
Yeah, no, I'm good, man. I'm good. It's good to be on. We got back from holiday yesterday. We're back to the cold weather, but man, it's good to be home now.
Okay,
And
we'll
what's
talk
the
about.
oh, sorry, mate. Yeah, what's schedule wise for you? Are you straight back into Toulouse stuff now? Is the French stuff a break until do they very much just leave you to your clubs, or what's the structure there?
Yeah. They kind of they leave us alone until the prep for the next for the next test games, and then we're straight back into Toulouse. So I've got Toulouse training in 2 hours, and we'll start training this week for Toulouse for the game this weekend.
Tell us about the Six Nations, because first time in a little while that the French have got up. Ireland's been dominating it recently. What were the celebrations like? You sealed the victory or you sealed the Six Nations Championship with victory over Scotland. I imagine the celebrations would have been pretty large.
Yeah, they were good, but they weren't. It was a weird one because you win the Six Nations, but boys also have to follow up with, like I said, like the Toulouse boys. We got the week off, like the following week. So on the weekend that just passed, we were all off. So we knew that we were gonna. So the boys had holidays planned. So we kind of enjoyed our celebrations, but the other boys, they kind of jumped on the fight, went back home, and were training the following Monday. So it was kind of mixed emotions in the celebrations. It was like, let's enjoy it, but also some boys had to go back and get straight back into it. So it's not like a top 14 or a European Cup celebration where everything's finished and the boys kind of let loose and enjoy for a week straight. But it was good fun. The Saturday night, Sunday, and then after Sunday, boys kind of just left. So
I love it. There was a few trophy drops just there. The Heineken Cup and the top 14 and the 6A. Which is your favourite? Tell me, you as a Kiwi born, I think, and then raised in Ippy, and then went down to the Rising, and then NRC in Sydney as well. Did you ever think that you'd be in Paris celebrating the Six Nations win for the French? And how's that come? Like, is your head very much around it now? Are you still a little bit like, geez, what's happened?
Nah. I think now my head's kind of around it. But never in a million years would I've guessed like where I would be right now. Like you said, New Zealand born, Aussie raised, went to school in Brisbane, played in Sydney, went down to Melbourne. So yeah, the goal was always to play Super Rugby and try to crack it through there. And I did go to Melbourne through your parents' little program, Island Breeze, and that kind of helped me get my foot in. But I didn't. It didn't happen with the Rebels. But yeah, I got an opportunity here in Toulouse and haven't looked back since. It's been awesome.
I remember Eddie Jones in a coaching seminar a while ago spoke about how the Australian system's still very much an old school, like white border, the way the game's played. Like it's borders, as in like fit white guys, country boys who kind of play long phases and this kind of stuff. I assume someone like yourself who has like that probably wouldn't have suited your shape, your body size, and going there and actually playing a game that's quite natural to you must feel like a huge sigh of relief, or feel like you're actually getting out of you, getting the potential out of you.
Yeah, for sure. Like 100%. I think when I was in Australia, there was always, not to blame Australia, but the goal was always to mold me into like a classic lock, like a classic number 4. So it was the conversations were always, drop weight. We need you to play 80 minutes. We need you to, your activity to be high, which I understand, which I think is fully fair on their half. But then moving to France, it was completely flipped, and them saying like, let's use your weight. Let's get your weight to a place where you can move, but also let's use your size. Let's use your strengths. Let's go as hard as you can, and if you can't go anymore, like we'll pull you off. And so it was interesting the way they kind of flipped it and used what I thought Australia were kind of trying to change, and make it into one of my strengths. And obviously, like, I do need to be continue to drop the weight, continue to be able to play longer minutes and more consistently and more effectively. But yeah, that's just gives me clarity on knowing, like, who I am and the way I'm built, works for this system, and I think that's what's really helped me progress here in France.
So do you think that you wouldn't have been able to become the Manny Meafou who's playing international rugby if you hadn't have made the move? Like, would you not have been the same player, or perhaps not less effective if you had stayed in Australia and playing Super Rugby?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I wouldn't say. I'd never say. Never say never. But I was in Australia for a while, and I was. I wasn't asking. I was never asking for $1 million contract. It was more just a foot in to kind of start training and get help and get like a full-time program. But I don't, like I said, I don't blame Australia for me leaving. It was just kind of the way it happened. There's a lot of good players in Oz, and I kind of just slipped through the cracks. But yeah, moving to France and then really embracing my body type, the way I play, and trying to just adjusting it and making it a bit better. Yeah, I think I couldn't have wrote a better journey for me and myself.
It's interesting because you and Will Skelton have both, the second half of Will's journey in professional rugby has been in France, and you both are so pivotal to your respective club sides. And maybe we didn't see the best of Will in Super Rugby in Australia, but we also saw the damaging runner that he was in a semi-final. Matt, you remember that one pretty well in 2014, but obviously he was going pretty well in 2015 too, and a couple of World Cup campaigns as well along the way.
Yeah. No, like I said, Will's massive here, and he's a massive guy, obviously, as you guys know. But yeah, like I said, and if you look at any other international country and the way they don't carry a big number five. Normally, you have your 4 and 5 pretty much the same. They're pretty much the same, but the French really emphasized that number 3 and that 5 carrying weight and carrying like a size, and it may not work for other countries, but I'm sure it works for them. But that's really been a positive for me, obviously, and being this size that they kind of look at that and see it as a positive rather than negative.
One thing I get often asked, Manny, when I was playing was who's the best player you've played with or against, and I'd like to think that I was fortunate enough to play with some pretty good ones. But you playing with Anton Dupont, quite possibly, in my view, quite possibly one of the best, if not the best player that's ever. What's it like playing with a guy like that who's just an absolute wizard?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I feel like still now I'm still so I don't know, naive to to understanding how good it is to kind of play with him, because I've come straight to Toulouse. He's been here straight away. You just kind of get used to it, but when you kind of look at things that he does, it's insane. But I think having a guy like that on your team, it's like you said, he's like he'll probably go down as one of the greatest, or if not like just one of. But and the position he's in as well, he gets his touches. And every touch he turns into something special. But I think a guy like that is reassuring. I think whatever you're down on the score, whatever's happening in the game, you know that you've got a guy like that in the team, and he can kind of just flip things on its head. And you know, he's pulled us out of some bad situations. But yeah, like you said, I think I'll look back on it all and be like far out and kind of just think about it that way. But I think right now it's just we've got so many good guys in our team, and we all kind of work well. But Toto's kind of the glue that holds it all together. It's unfortunate that he's injured now, but yeah, we'll try our best without him.
Tell me, is it hard to explain to people back in Ipswich or wherever your friends and family are? Is it hard to tell them how big rugby is in France and like how crazy the following is? If you win a top 14 or take your pick in terms of your trophy cabinet, but if you win this, like this town's just shut down. It must feel bizarre when you go home and you're like, you guys have no idea what's kind of on the other side of this plane flight, like.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's insane because there's not a lot of coverage on unless like you're massive into rugby and you're following it and you're looking to watch it, you're not going to see much of the top 14 or much of European rugby in Oz. And that's for me myself. Moving to Toulouse, I had no idea like where I was going, the club like history and stuff like that. And that's just me being like just not looking into it or not just having no knowledge of it. So when I first arrived, I didn't play much of the 2018-19 season, but it was the following. The boys won the double, and so I was posting videos of us winning the European Cup, and everyone's saying, "Oh, congratulations, congratulations!" And then the week after, I'm posting up of the boys playing that week, and everyone's messaging me, "I thought you just won the whole comp," and it's hard to explain to them like we played two different comps at the same time. We just won one. We've still got another one to play. But yeah, it's hard to explain to them when, but I understand because when I came, you come and you go to full packed out stadiums, people are lined up outside. There's people, outside barbecuing, and it's a real culture here. But when you try to explain it back home, they kind of just they brush it off. I feel like it's a you must experience it yourself to really understand how much the French get behind it.
I know that Toulouse went down overnight to Bordeaux. It was a great second half where Toulouse came back, but the lights show to start the match. There's 40,000. It's packed to the rafters. It just tells you everything you need to know about the French top 14. I want to ask around with what Dupont's allowed French rugby to do, and even Luca. We went into the last couple of games there with the 7-1 split on the bench. What's it like being part of that bench? Because it just looks like, there's some people that go, it's wrecking the identity and the ethical nature of what the bench was supposed to be about. One former pundit said it was abusing the power of it. But you're part of that bench. What's it like when you come on and there's 7 of you and it seems like it just changes the game by having a brand new forward pack, and mentally and physically you've just got it over. And we saw that especially in that win in Dublin.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I don't know. Yeah, it's when you're coming on with with the quality of players as well. Like if you see a lot of the me myself, I'm only new to the international scene, so I've only got a few caps, but I'm coming on with boys who have got 30, 40, 50 plus caps. So they're not debutants, like they're not making their first game and trying to make an impact on the game. These are well experienced players that are coming on to give the best of what they've got for 30, 35 minutes. So it's really reassuring, especially in that Dublin game. The bench kind of spoke before we went on, so we spoke at halftime about making an impact and stuff like that, and we saw what it did. And then coming into that Scotland game where it was a bit back and forth, we weren't as head as we thought we were going to be, and we really understood that it was going to be us to try to change the game. But yeah, I think it's a privilege. It's a privilege to be a part of it. It's worked for us so far, thanks to South Africa for the idea. But it's awesome, man. It's awesome. It's a privilege.
It obviously suits. Like we are just talking about the size profile of particularly your tight head lock. But if you're both locks in this case and you're 6. If you're starting the game, you're playing probably 50, 55. Like you go 40, you get a rest, then you go, like, it genuinely brings a level of intensity that if you've got 80 minutes staring ahead of you, you're probably not going to go as hard. And it's I think it's fascinating. I love what it's doing to the game, and I think it really brings on guys like yourself, some different types of we've got. I feel like we've got the range back. We've got yourself, and then you've got, I can't say his name, Bielbury.
Bielbury, yeah.
Yeah. Like, you guys are in the same team playing the same sport. Like, that seems ridiculous, but it's great, and it's that's the thing that I love. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think also what Christy was saying, like, people are kind of against it and stuff. I think it's risk and reward. Like, I think if you got backs go down, then you're kind of in trouble. But if you take the risk and it works out, then good on you. But if it doesn't work out, then I guess that's the decision you make. But I think it's rugby. If it's allowed, if it's illegal, then why not evolve and continue to change the sport?
There's a long way to go with this season. The French top 14 just goes on and on and on. But it's been a big talking point around the New Zealand upcoming All Blacks series and whether or not the top team or a B team or a C team, what team's going to go to France. Roman Antimac said last week that he was keen to go down and take on the All Blacks. Is that the feeling with a lot of the guys that are playing for the top French sides that might go deep into the competition? Do you still want to get down and take on the All Blacks in July?
Yeah, I do see a lot of that stuff in the media about the French. I think the thing is, it's not that the boys don't want to play in New Zealand and they don't want to play against their best. It's nothing to do with the international part of it. I think the boys, obviously, as athletes, you always want to be the best. So you want to verse the best, beat the best, to become the best. I think the thing is, because our season is a 10-month season, the only break we get is in that summer test. So that's why the French kind of rotate their players, and especially if you're making finals, we're resting boys and stuff like that. But if you talk to almost all the boys that are up for selection, they would tell you that they would love to travel there because that summer test is probably the best test games to play. Like we're traveling to Argentina, we're traveling to they traveled to South Africa. They had 3 games in Oz a couple years ago, and then now we've got 3 games in New Zealand. And for the French boys, because the season's so long, they don't do a lot of traveling. If they do travel, they're staying within Europe. They're going maybe to America. But boys like it, a lot of Frenchies love the culture, the scene that's in Oz and in New Zealand, but they just never get to experience it because if you're playing full time top 14, the last thing you want to do is jump on a 30-hour flight to go somewhere when you've only got 4 weeks off. So in terms of playing, the boys want to play, the boys want to be out there, but then it's also trying to balance, what's best for your body, and then also like, but yeah, if the boys got given holidays no matter what, regardless, and also going into the next season fresh, I think the boys would all put their hands up for that test and would love to go down.
It's just that, are you in that camp as well that you want to play in July? Because obviously New Zealand born, I imagine it would mean even more, and you probably have family back there. But at this point in time, are you kind of not sure if you'll go down?
Yeah, no, I have no clue on what we were told just before we left the last week of camp, the Six Nations camp, that because normally if you make the finals, you're automatically not going, like you're not going to a thing because they have the week prep with during the semi-final and the final week. So if you make finals, you're automatically not going. But we got told that they're picking the semi-finalists, and then they're also going to be picking the finalists, win or lose. So so I think Fabian's got in his head that we're definitely going down there to try and compete, try to win. We're not throwing a B or C team, but I think it'll just really matter on health and on how the boys are doing. But yeah, I'll definitely be putting my hand up if we are going.
B or C team, D team, I'm sure it's going to be a good team knowing the depth in France. Another big story in Australia recently was a young kid who's 17, a guy called Sio Kite. And I don't know if you've heard about him, but he's just been signed by La Rochelle, and 147 kilos, 204 centimetres. And it was kind of, it rocked a lot of people in Rugby Australia about this young kid heading up to France who's still a teenager, still very much at school. What do you think? If you had been like, you went, I think as a 19 or a 20-year-old up there, like, do you think it's still very much a decision that you're glad that you went to then? But do you think kids that are still teenagers can go up there and still thrive and be in a really supportive academy system that's going to get the best out of someone?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. If he wasn't being looked at or being, kind of helped in Oz, then I fully agree with this decision. I think the thing in Oz is when I was playing, look, I went to a private school. I went to Ipswich Grammar, so it's not like I had a lack of opportunities. It was more a lack of knowledge. So when I didn't make Aussie schoolboys, I thought that was the end of it for me. Like, I didn't know that there was more. Like, I had to go play club rugby. I didn't know that I had to, try and. There's not a clear set of steps on how to make Super Rugby. It's just kind of, if you get approached, if you get picked, and if you're on the radar, then you kind of understand where you're going. But if you're not on that radar, I feel like a lot of kids are lost. And that's the thing here in France is, after school, like, they don't have so their clubs, so Stade Toulouse have like a under 12s, like, all the way up to the pros, and then that's what helps the younger boys. Like, you're progressing through the club since, like, till, like, from the age of 10, and then if you get up and you get a contract to the under 20s, the 20s is playing with the pros, and then, like, it's all there's a there's the stepping stones to how to make it to the pros, and that it's very clear, and everyone knows that, and it's like that for every single top 14 team, and that's how that's how how to get to the pros. And I just think that's just what, at least for me personally, I think that's what's kind of missing in Oz. There's no clear stepping stone on how to make Super Rugby. And if you're not on anyone's radar, and if you're not being spoken to, you're kind of just left behind. And I think for that kid, he's only 16. He's a lot younger than I am than when I came over. So I don't know what his situation is, but for a big guy like him, I heard he plays tight end prop. Like, moving to La Rochelle will only be the best thing for him. They've got one of the best scrums, tight end props there. So he's only going to get better. So yeah, there's, like I said, there's no going backwards for this kid or anyone that moves over here. If he ends up, like I said, if he wants to go back to Australia later, he'll go back a better player, and Australia will benefit from that. But if he doesn't, then that's his choice. And
It's
I'm happy for him.
it's impossible to tell a young kid who might not be getting the love over here, and then he gets a bit of interest overseas, that one, you can come over, get some cash, a good good stepping stone, but two, you don't have to run a Bronco. Three, you can stay and push scrums, and then 7 forwards are going to come on. Like, it's
yeah.
You talk about incentives. I think you'd be mad to say no to that.
Yeah, 100%. And
do they make you run Broncos, or are you good?
Nah, I'm still on the Bronco list, not on the veterans contract anymore. But no,
Fair enough.
We still run it, but only probably like once a year. So
yeah, okay.
Look, probably important to highlight that Kite was part of the Queensland under 16s and Aussie 16s set up, so very much in the pathway. But I completely agree with your comments there. He's going to be well looked after at La Rochelle, and geez, there's some good players there, including obviously Will Skelton. Hey, you've got to get down to calling some lineouts and packing down in scrums next to Richie Arnold, another great Wallaby there. So better leave you to it. But thanks so much for joining us. Really good to get an insight into what it's like in France, but also to catch up with a long-lost soul that's spent a long time in Australia, but really has found their feet in France. So good luck for the rest of the year.
Nah, thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
I enjoyed that because Emmanuel Meafou, understated guy, and he's just come back from a week holiday, I think, off the back of Six Nations, but great to get his insight into what's happening in France, not just with playing with Toulouse and Antoine Dupont, but the desire to come down and a bit of an explanation about what it's going to take to beat the All Blacks in July and who actually might be involved.
Yeah, and look, I think with the World Cup down here in Australia in a few years' time, I wouldn't be surprised if they do kind of go against the French way and really target it. And I tell you, what was really refreshing to hear was he wasn't dirty to Australian rugby, was he? Like, he probably had every right to feel a bit dirty about it and say, "Oh, you know what you're doing, blah blah blah. Look at me now." But he wasn't like that at all, and it's pretty amazing.
I reckon a year or two ago he may have, but that would have been obviously closer. And now that he's probably gone, you know what, that's a blessing in disguise. I'm now playing with the best team in the world and one of the absolute World Cup favourites in a couple of years' time. Like you touched on the great juxtaposition there between the massive units that France have, but also the flair that's on display out wide as well. And it's he seems like a gentle giant, doesn't he? But he doesn't show that on the field.
Oh, I'm sure he wouldn't. And I'm loving the way the game's going with that. With the French and the South Africans. Yeah, you've got your Colbys and then your Etzebeths. Like I love it. I think it's what makes our game unique. It's what makes our game inclusive of, for want of a better word. Like it's really, really cool. So yeah, I'm loving it. It's moving in a cool direction.
Hey, a big pod. We don't always have two guests, but I think that worked out well, and awesome to check in what's happening in France at the moment. We've got things to get to, or you certainly do as well, because it's a big week in
Temptation Week, mate. Temptation Week. Ryan and Jackie, I can't believe they're still in it, but hey, who knows? Cliffhangers everywhere.
Some people might have been saying that about you and I once upon a time. I don't think so. No, not at all. Hey, great pod. Can't wait to do it again in a week's time, and we'll see who else comes on next time.